welcome to today's Wellness Watch session. This session comes from Season 1 of Wellness Watch, which was originally recorded on our live learning platform called Learn It Live. If you have any questions, put them into the comments below, and do subscribe for more herbal medicine, health, and wellness related content. I hope you enjoy our session today on breathing. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Wellness Watch. This week we are going to be talking about breathing. Ooh, we gotta all do that every day. If you don't know me yet, my name's Jillian Karnick. I run the Dancing Herbalist. I have a Master's of Science degree in herbal medicine. I'm also a nutritionist, certified personal trainer, and exercise medicine professional. My personal focus with the Dancing Herbalist is making topical herbal products for joint and muscle pain, as well as skin sensitivities and injuries. If you are looking for more personalized support with wellness or other herbal support, you can contact the Dancing Herbalist to get a consultation set up with either myself or Annabelle. Annabelle, hi, how you doing?
Hey, good morning. I'm just trying to.
Annabelle, you will need to hang up something because you are echoing.
Yeah, I just realized that I turned my other thing off. So, anyway, good morning. I am happy to be here, excited to talk about breathing, and just trying to get a little energy. It's a bit of an overcast day.
Mm-hmm. So after this session, if you guys want to find more information out about Dancing Herbalist or get more support with your own wellness path, we do have our wellness newsletter that will actually be sent out in a few days. So now's a great time to jump on that. You can get signed up for the Dancing Herbalist wellness newsletter at thedancingherbalist.com. You can also find our products right on there as well for your pain and skin support. And now that you've found Learn It Live, we do have a variety of other classes on here as well for herbal medicine, nutrition, physiology, plant identification, and much more. So I hope you guys will check some of those out. There are other free classes. There are some paid classes as well. So you got a few different options. And if you are looking for some quick support after this session today, our Facebook group, the Dancing Herbalist Herbies, is the best way to get that. It's very quick and easy on our Facebook group. Just post something and usually someone will reply within a few hours. So it's a great quick support method. And like I said, this week we're talking about breathing. We do have our May schedule ready now. Next week we'll be talking about meditation as well. Then following that by mindful eating on May 15th and fasting on May 22nd. Annabelle, any of these in particular you're looking forward to talking about?
Well, I'm looking forward to talking about all of them. But in particular, I don't know. Maybe the snacking.
You mean mindful eating?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. I think we're going to talk about snacks a lot in that session, even though it doesn't have to be just snacks.
Right. Now, for me, I always think of it sort of as snacking because I'm not really even paying attention. I'm just feeling so distracted a lot. So I'm looking forward to talking about that one.
Yeah, great planning as I put another chip in my mouth. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good morning.
So, Annabelle, one thing I'm curious about that I'd like to start talking about with breathing. Now, you've had a lot of medical challenges, and I'm really curious if you've noticed if your breathing has been affected by them.
Very much. It's been impacted profoundly, actually. I just have started getting to the point where I'm not struggling with something called air hunger. Are you familiar with that term?
I think I have heard it before.
Yeah, it's basically you feel like you're suffocating.
Yeah, constantly gasping almost.
Right. So, and one thing I really noticed as I was, because I was ill for many years, one thing I noticed is that I did not breathe deeply, and often because I had so many neurological issues, I would almost forget to breathe. So I would have these really long periods where I would be holding my breath.
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty common, actually. I mean, I feel like, not as exaggerated, but a lot of times, we're really busy. We live in a very busy culture. Even our free time is busy.
Yeah.
So people go on vacation and they plan busy schedules on vacation. So I think a lot of people probably hold their breath a lot more than they realize. What do you think?
No, I definitely agree. And I actually had a lot of breathing issues as well, especially growing up. I was labeled as having asthma as a very small child. And
Mm.
I don't know if you knew this about me. Yes, I had asthma and I had to use a nebulizer and all of these different machines that I was hooked up to and such. When other kids were out playing, I was practicing breathing into a machine.
Oh,
But then
yeah.
my breathing got a lot better as I moved into middle school and high school. And I think for me, a lot of that had to do with dance. Because with dancing, or at least with the system I was trained in for my ballet, I had to learn how to breathe as I was doing each step. So if you think about like yoga, there's a lot of breathing that goes into it as to enhance the effectiveness of the movements. But the same goes into ballet, definitely, probably a number of other modern and contemporary dances as well, but not so much with like social dancing. Um, so that was helping, but I had another issue that came up through my dancing as well, and through ballet I got what is called costal chondritis. So basically my ribs started to fuse to my spinal column.
Oh,
um,
my.
very very small amounts, so like some inflammation and irritation and some more not necessarily bony growth, but the tendons weren't as flexible as they should have been. So that actually really restricted my breathing. And it wasn't until I started doing yoga in college that I really like finally learned how to do belly breathing appropriately. And that started to open up my breathing so that I wasn't as restricted because I was so used to doing chest breathing because that's how we were told to do it in ballet,
Right.
because you have to minimize your shoulder movement, you have to minimize your abdominal movement for the visual aesthetic, but that is not ideal for health and longevity.
No, and I'm glad that you use that term, chest breathing,
Mm-hmm.
because I've been developing, a protocol, basically learning how to breathe
Mm-hmm.
correctly. And what I mean by correctly is, so just like nutrition, whenever we eat really healthy foods and we're trying to make a conscientious effort to get as much nutrition as we can, whenever you are having chronic illness issues, you definitely need to make sure you're getting enough oxygen in. That's one of the main sources of our health and vitality. You can live without food. You can live without water for days, food even for longer, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't live without breathing.
Nope.
So, and it's really, something that I did not make a connection with until I started doing, like you were saying, when I started trying to do yoga, I started to try and practice mindfulness and meditation. And that's where I realized that I'm in my 40s, but I don't actually know how to breathe.
So before we definitely should continue on and talk about yoga and breathing and yoga. But if you are interested, I found a video a while back, and I'm sure it'd be pretty searchable, about what would happen to the world if the Earth lost all oxygen for 30 seconds.
Mm,
And it's
that's
quite
amazing. I would
fascinating.
love to see that. I would
It's
love to
quite
see that.
fascinating because the most interesting things, yes, you first think of suffocating, but it's not just our bodies that are impacted because all of the oceans will disappear.
Right.
And
Right.
so that's one interesting. The other one that I thought was really interesting was concrete
Huh.
disassembles, basically. That the
Really?
atoms associated with concrete that keep it strong and sturdy require oxygen to be in the atmosphere. So
Wow.
I
That's
thought that was
fascinating.
another, yeah, really interesting thing. But it's a great video, I think, to look at to see how important oxygen is just to our entire world, just to our just existence and what we've come to understand as life. But
Right.
so yoga was definitely where I first started learning to breathe. And um, I think it's a way a lot of people are first taught to breathe, or at least it's the way I see a lot of people being taught, is to like lie down on your back with your knees bent and then put like a book or even just a piece of paper, but something with a little bit of weight. So maybe like a small notebook. Put that on your stomach and then breathe with the aim of seeing the book go up and down.
Yes, that's one of the exercises that is in I have a three-part exercise,
Hmm.
and that is one that focuses on the diaphragm specifically that
Yep.
a doctor that teaches basically breathing. I read her book, and so it was interesting. So cat cow was another one, and then there was another sort of sitting and rocking back and forth while working on getting breath into the lower, meridians, into the
Are you
lower
referring
body.
to like rolling like a ball?
No, because you sit with your legs crossed Indian style, almost like you're going to be meditating.
Oh, I understand. Yep.
Yeah, and then hands on your knees, and you basically pump your chest out and then sink back in
Hmm.
accordance with filling up not just your chest but your stomach with air, which is interesting because it makes such a huge difference. But when I started these exercises, I
Hmm.
learned very quickly that I needed to um, move slowly in the sense like I didn't start doing 20 at a time because I would get lightheaded because I've been oxygen deprived for so long.
Definitely. Well, it's interesting you have those three as, let's say, your first three. Um, the one that I described of lying down, if I were to label that one, I would then not put the other two you listed for maybe like until like 10 to 15. I would put way more practices in between that are much simpler to slowly increase the oxygen into the body over time.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
one of those reasons is because you do have to train the muscles, as you were talking about with the diaphragm. You do have to train the muscles differently, because especially our society values people who hold their abdominals in. This is
sure.
just
Yeah,
what our
right.
society values.
Right.
um, And as such, it tends to be when small children are learning about the world, and it's generally around maybe 5 and 6 when they start to like see adults holding themselves and how they hold their bodies, and that's when they start to chest breathe. Versus before
Right.
that, it's much more of a tendency to do the belly breathing. Um,
Yeah, we're
but
born belly breathing, and when
mhm,
we sleep, we're supposed, I mean, that's belly breathing.
not
Naturally, we're
always.
supposed to be belly breathing.
Yes, definitely we should be, but I don't think everyone does as when sleeping, which is I think probably an added problem for like back pain and such.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, you were talking about hydration
Mm-hmm.
as far as, talking about that video and if oxygen were gone and the oceans dissipating. So it's interesting because that's how I got into learning about the necessity for proper breathing was when I started actually researching hydration on a cellular level.
Mm.
And that's whenever I made the connection that something was wrong. And I think we are so young whenever we get away from belly breathing that I think that most people in their adulthood probably don't even really have any idea, and then if you're especially not doing it when you're sleeping, then that natural mechanism inside of the body to heal itself, I think, becomes very impaired.
So
Oxygen or breathing for our cellular health, I think, is way more critical than people think.
no, I definitely agree. And you made me think of something that I find fascinating because we definitely do need to be hydrated to get the most out of what we're breathing. Because our lungs have to stay hydrated and have to be moist in order to bring oxygen into the cells. And
Right.
it's not just that though, because as you're talking about, like, as long as if we're staying hydrated adequately, there's going all of our blood has to go through our lungs because that's where it gets oxygen. That's where the transport system goes. But there's also the capacity of if our blood is moving quickly, continually, etc., that gases that are in our blood that need to escape can also leave through the lungs. So the lungs can also be a method of detoxification. It's not really like one that's really like commonly thought of, but we do expel gases as we breathe out. And if you've got a
Yeah.
lot of toxins in your lungs from like smoke or something like that, you may be really inhibited from doing that if you don't have the muscle strength to really allow yourself to exhale as well as inhale.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, with the air hunger, I definitely have struggled with the exhale as
Mm-hmm.
well. Because the neurological function of the muscles were messed up from the neurological damage. But it's interesting you were saying that, and I just forgot what the point was of what you just said. But so I'll have to speak to it later. But the lungs, being a sort of, I think of them as a secondary detoxification organ, whereas I view the liver and all that colon and stuff like that, lymph, as being primary, but very much an eliminatory organ.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that supporting the lungs is very important. And I think even if you're not a smoker, we live in a very toxic environment. We live most of us live around a lot of industrial work. There's a lot of chemicals in the air. So I think that was something I started really learning I was a smoker for a very long time because I never did myself any favors in my health till I got older. But even, coming out of that, I still noticed that I struggled in certain areas because of having things like exhaust or something like that around. And I think that's how, we can really get overloaded with the toxins and then start to suffer some pulmonary issues.
No, definitely. And it's easy to forget that we talk about relatively frequently that our digestive system is just our skin on the inside, but our lungs are the same exact way. It's the same exact kind of
Right.
tissue as our digestive system and our skin. And we're always so concerned about toxins and chemicals in our food and in our body care products, but it's very easy to forget about our air because
It is. And it's also easy to, forget the mindfulness, to take a few moments and really just be and breathe. Slow down for a moment and just breathe. And because we can spend all kinds of money on wonderful, nutrient-dense, organic foods and supplements, but if we're not breathing correctly, we're not going to get that nutrition to the cells the way that it needs to get there without the oxygen.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it really, I used to want to be in the practice of stopping a couple times a day and just sort of focusing on breathing. I always had a lot of things that I aspired to, but I would get caught up. I would get busy, working full time, family, illness issues. And it's only been this last, I don't know, it's only been into my 40s that I decided that I was going to stop a couple of times a day, and I was just going to focus on breathing. But it's amazing how just taking a few moments to focus on breathing can help you with your mood and can help calm you down.
I definitely agree. And I think the best time, like if you're beginning to practice like that, I definitely think right before going to bed and right before getting out of bed are the ideal times to do it. And I guess I started talking about it, but I stopped. The whole concept of lying down when you're learning to breathe, because your muscles are weaker, so it's going to be easier because you're not fighting against gravity. So
Oh, that makes
I
sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that makes lying in bed and right before going to bed, it's also really good to help calm you. We're going to be talking about meditation next week, but breathing, again, you talked about getting more oxygen to all of our cells really allows us to calm down and really focus. And the it can also be a great time to kind of set intentions for the day before you get up in the morning. Kind of be like, today it's going to be nice and calm and slow, and I'm going to breathe the way I want to be in the world today. And what comes to me now thinking about this is the other side, is that a lot of people don't want to be aware of how their day is going, and not stopping and breathing is a way to mask that, and just keep going is a way to not have to worry about the things you have on your mind because you've just got other things to do. And it can be
Very
really
much
hard
so.
to process life. And stopping and breathing encourages you to do that.
Which is so great. We're going to segue into meditation next week because that's, that's the whole point. Definitely. It is really hard to stop and not, I call it thinking and thoughting, which are, I feel, two different things. You can think, and use your practical, rational mind and think about executing things or, plan things or what have you. You can think, but, thoughting gets a lot out of control where there's just thoughts and thoughts and thoughts and thoughts, and also what you said makes sense because especially when I was extremely ill, and I was working and things of that nature, I felt that I could not stop and think and focus on how I was feeling because I would crumble.
Yeah.
So,
It's
it's
safe
like you
to
keep
not
that
think about it.
momentum going. Right. Yeah. So I certainly didn't stop to think about how I was breathing. I mean, it just never even really occurred to me, to be honest. I knew that I wasn't breathing a lot, and I had developed a lot of panic attacks, and so I was always struggling with breathing. And I don't know, you're probably aware of this, but I had, I needed an inhaler, and I had constant lung infections, constant bronchitis, pneumonias, and swelling in the lungs, and just, I needed steroids all the time. I was on antibiotics all the time. And, so I was always struggling with breathing. So it's nice to get sort of to this side where even though I still struggle neurologically as I go through recovery, I now can breathe a little bit easier. And so it just takes a long time to build up that muscle strength.
Yeah, and so we talked about, or I tried to describe in detail where I would start with breathing, just like lying on the ground with the raising the book on your stomach. But the next one that I encourage people to do is kind of, I want to call it the wave. So it's a similar idea to cat and cow, but again, you're lying down, so you don't have to use as many muscles. So if you're lying on your back, again, when your knees are bent, it's a little bit more comfortable on your hips to do all of these breathing things. That's why I always mention bending your knees. But it's similar. You breathe into your stomach, just like you do the other one. But then you breathe into your lower ribs, and then you breathe into your upper ribs, and all in one breath. And then you breathe out from your chest, out from your lower ribs, and then out from your stomach, and kind of create like a wave. And the real good benefit of this one is it's engaging muscles to allow you to use all of your lungs, because we tend to just use the top part of our lungs, but this allows you to get a full breath and use all of the lobes of your lungs. So you're going to be getting way more oxygen, like you were talking about. That's why, again, lying down is good in case you get more oxygen than your brain can handle. But that shouldn't happen. But just doing like 3 or 4 of those breaths, and then just doing some belly breathing and just lying there for like 5 minutes doing that. Really, the deep ones, you don't have to do many, doing the wave breaths. But they can be really vitalizing. And if you only have a few seconds and just a normal belly breath isn't really kind of centering you mentally, I think doing the wave breath can really do that. It also takes a little bit longer to do that kind of breath. So that itself is kind of like calming you and slowing you down and making you more aware.
Right.
So I really
that's
like that.
so interesting because it made me think about, well, next time I see you, I'm going to get you to teach me the wave exactly. But we also one time discussed briefly breathing in or out through the nose, in or out through the mouth. What is your take on that?
So I'll actually write a note down about this because I have some papers about that, and I've been meaning to write a blog about it. Hold on. So again, my thoughts on this come from the yoga practice that I initially started with, and it's a very interesting concept because I learned yoga and Pilates at the same time. I've had the option to try a few different breathing versus muscle engagement techniques. The Pilates practice I was learning at the time was labeled as traditional Pilates, and the concept behind breathing and muscle contractions So Pilates is an exercise form versus yoga is not necessarily always exercise in quotes. But with Pilates, you breathe out as you engage the muscle, and you breathe in as you relax the muscle. And that tends to be the exact opposite in a number of yoga practices, that you breathe in when you relax the muscle and then breathe out as you engage. Did I say that right?
Think so. Yeah, it's pretty
I said
interesting
Pilates
because
one, right?
there's two different schools. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
there are two very different ones. Now, personally, I think a lot of that depends on like what muscles you're engaging. And I know we're talking about the nose and the mouth, and I'm going to get to that because the same exact thing exists within yoga with the breathing between the nose and the mouth. Now, I think one of the most popular schools of thought when it comes to that is that you should breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. And now
Right.
I'm definitely against breathing in and out of the mouth. That I'm definitely against. My personal preference is consistently breathing in and out of the nose, but I can give value to the individuals that breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. And part of that, I think I like the energetic pathway idea, that it's a continuous pathway rather than going back and forth along the same line. But I definitely think it's integral to breathe in through your nose because our nasal passages act as a filtering system for the air coming into our bodies. And I think that's really necessary for our own health because when you think about getting a stuffy nose, the whole concept of that, of what's happening is that you're producing more mucus so your nasal passages can get out whatever is in there. That's the same idea of when you like sneeze because you're trying to quickly expel whatever allergens have come into your nose.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I think those are really important. And one thing that I find interesting is that the yoga practice that I was initially learning from even was as specific as which nostril are you in breathing in and out of more. And there's
So were you
actually
doing Kundalini?
the teacher always labeled it as hatha yoga, but I don't feel confident that it fits the standard hatha yoga because I have not done as much yoga in the past, let's say 10 years as I was 15 to 20 years ago doing yoga. But I think the standards and the lines between different kinds of yoga has become more consistent now, versus I don't think it was quite as consistent back then. Um, but I think there's some value as well to balancing between breathing in your nose and your mouth, and also learning to balance between which side of your nose you are breathing in and out of more frequently. And I do have somewhere notes on the correspondences between the right and the left side of the nose because they can be more engaging and relaxing compared to each other, and stimulating and not stimulating. So that balancing those so you can breathe equally between the two sides of your nose, I think is a very unique concept that I don't ever hear talked about. Um, so I think there is
Well,
value in that as well.
it seems like it should be talked about because,
Yeah.
I mean, that makes complete sense to me. Now I have had paralysis on one side of the body. So whenever I went and did a neurological eye, deal, I met with a eye doctor that was specifically more neurological based. And she had mentioned to me that, both sides of my body were not functioning at the same level. And so that would make really big sense to me to take a moment and see, because one side needs to build up strength a lot more than another side does.
Yep. And the thing
So
with
I never thought of that.
One of the things I remember clearly about the nose breathing between the two different sides is that it does change every few hours, at like where you're naturally breathing out of. I mean, it can even change more frequently than that, but it can also be a good method of determining whether you should be eating or resting or doing work and that sort of thing, depending on where your body is, which nostril your body is breathing out of at the time. And because that gives you a better idea of where your mindset is, where you can most effectively function at that point in time.
Absolutely. That's interesting. I think I want to pay a little more attention to the difference in my breathing whenever I'm tired or if I get, fatigued during the day. I mean, I've really just started this journey of learning to breathe, recently, and I'm constantly now coming up on it being discussed, so, and I'm paying attention to how people do it. In the morning, that one of my new favorite things is Qigong. And I love the breathing in Qigong, which is usually through the nose. But sometimes whenever there's a big sort of exhale that's a release of, negative qi, negative energy, they will do a heavy breath through the mouth, like expelling. And I like that because it also psychologically helps me feel like I'm, getting rid of not just chemical toxins from our environment, but toxic thoughts and feelings and, maladaptive behaviors. So I really like that.
I agree. I think that the breathing out of the mouth has a lot more of a psychological component to it. And that it can be a great release of whatever you're holding on to. And I think one thing that goes with that is that when we have a tendency to breathe out of our mouth, we have a tendency to involve our shoulders with that action. And a lot of us hold a lot of our tension in our shoulders. So if we're breathing out heavily through our mouth, we have a tendency to raise our shoulders and just drop them. And I think there's some value to that as well.
I think so too. That was one of the very first things that I was reading in this book was she was saying that when you start breathing correctly, you will start to notice that you don't have as much neck and shoulder tension because you're not constantly engaging these muscles to breathe.
Yep.
Because
you're engaging your abdominal
more. Right. And, also, when you talk about that, using the abdominal muscles more, it again goes to our belly is called the core for a reason. Everything is centralized in the belly. A lot of people think the brain, but I think the belly is a bigger brain than the brain.
Yeah, our core comes a lot from the fact that it has to be our center of balance.
Right.
Now, women have a slightly lower center of balance than men do, but it's still all in the abdominal region. And if we don't have strong abdominals, we're not able to sit upright. We're not able to stand. I mean, think of small children when they are developing, I mean, not small children, but babies, when they are developing, there's a time where they don't have the abdominal strength to sit upright. And that's when they first can start viewing the world, is when they finally have the strength in their core, literally, to do so.
Right. I mean, I think having a good, strong core is quintessential to having wellness and vitality being a part of your life versus chronic illness, disease, and disorder. So, and it's interesting, we talked about this too, was about yawning. I didn't realize how important the function of yawning was until I could no longer yawn. Once I became very ill, I didn't have that ability anymore until I did some healing. And I remember the first time I yawned after a very long time, and I was like, whoa. I felt like, my lungs were just getting flooded with air again for the first time, almost like I had come up from water.
Wow.
And you and I were talking a little bit about yawning, but yawning actually has a purpose. And I think you remind me of what we were talking about if you can, but we were talking about the function of yawning and how it helps to keep the body in balance.
I don't remember this conversation. I'm sorry, Annabelle.
It might have been with someone else, but we were talking about how it does things like basically modulate, helps the body from going into seizures and things of that nature. So the yawning is sort of a regulator.
Interesting.
But I thought it was you that I had that discussion with, but I don't know.
I don't think it was me, but I can see a very interesting concept developing in my head from that, is that the balance between yawning and sighing. And how with yawning,
how are they different?
Well, I'm seeing yawning as a taking in of more versus sighing is letting go of more.
Right.
Very conceptual.
So that makes sense.
I'm sorry.
That makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me.
So when you started to do more breathing, what were the first things that you were paying attention to?
Well, the first things I was paying attention to, goodness, really has been trying to get to the point of doing any belly breathing. So I really didn't belly breathe at all. And so I felt actually when I first started doing breathing exercises, and I only did 15 of them, the 3 various ones, 5 each, I felt sore.
Yep.
So really early on, my focus, became giving myself time to breathe. How you were talking about, first thing in the morning and in the evening before bed, I started developing a practice of actually consciously stopping through the day to breathe. That's really where my focus was, because once I gained the knowledge that I was having issues with breathing and I knew I needed to do breathing exercises, I still had a hard time trying to slow down and actually apply that to my daily life.
So
which I
we
think
can talk
is
about
probably
it.
What is it?
I was gonna say we could talk about it more during the meditation time next week, but it wasn't until I set aside an hour every day for a month to breathe and meditate that I really started to get into it myself. I mean, I had learned how to breathe and meditate through college, but it wasn't until a few years ago that I really started focusing more on it and like seeing the value of it for how much it was really able to calm myself and center myself so that I could really focus and be aware of everything around me more effectively.
Right, and I think this is probably many people's very big struggle. I know it was for me, and this was even after being disabled to the point of not being able to work any longer. Finding time in the day to stop really, honestly, was a huge struggle because, like you were talking about, as we learn in our childhood, you know, everything is go, 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 go. And there's always more to do, and there's more chores. And I just was like, I don't have time to stop. I don't have time to stop. I don't, you know, I never could figure out a way to make time for myself. That was really, really hard for me. I think a lot of people are the same way. I think a lot of people don't take time to focus on some of these health concerns such as breathing or diet or movement or mindfulness because it feels pretty overwhelming, and
Yeah.
it feels like it's going to take a lot of time, you know?
Well, I definitely remember around the time I was starting to learn breathing practices, because like I talked about, was I had the weird issues with my ribs and my spinal column. When I would start to breathe, and I mean, like in yoga, one of the most common poses is the dead man's pose, Shavasana. Basically, you're just lying on your back breathing. And I had a really hard time with.
Oh, I wonder if your connection went out. Julian. So sometimes the connection over there times out. And usually she's right back, but I'm very interested to hear what she's going to say about this when she was younger. I have no idea. One of the things that's really cool about this is even though we've been friends for a while, we're always learning new stuff about each other and getting ideas from each other, and that's why we started this.
Sorry about that, everyone. We are back now. Annabelle, what you do while I was gone?
I didn't, I just talked about how interested I was to learn something new about you that I didn't know, because even though we get together all the time, we always learn all these amazing new things in our talks.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know what the last thing you heard me saying was, but basically when I would do breathing meditations before, I would basically, my mind would open up the blocks on pain that I had in my back. So I would start to feel a lot of pain while I was breathing and meditating. And I'm assuming that's definitely something you've also experienced, Annabelle, because I know you've dealt with a lot of pain as well.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that's one thing I've learned, you know, once we get to this point, you know, pain is just part of the process.
Mm. It's
It really
unfortunate.
is. And whenever you have a lot of toxicity, this is something that I discuss a lot with people, you know, that want to know more about my story and recovering. And they, you know, I just have to remind them that, you know, it's not a soft and light and fluffy experience, but it will wake you up to paying attention to your body.
And I think we both can say this honestly, is that the best thing to do is go slow.
Oh my goodness. I remember whenever you used to tell me that all the time.
Now do you believe me, Annabelle?
Yes, definitely. It took me a while to get that lesson, but I got it. And that's interesting because when I started these breathing exercises, I was like, yep, I'm going slow. And I'm glad I did because, like I said, I noticed, you know, the pain issue there. But
Hmm.
a lot of times, well, the way I view pain inside of the body is that it's exposing a weakness. It's flagging you, saying, "Hey, this isn't right. Something here isn't going well."
I agree.
And then from there, you know, you address it. But so as I've gone through the process of recovering, I have experienced a lot of pain. But like I said, I know that I've done it long enough now to know that that pain is temporary, just like whenever you go on the first long hike of the season and you're aching when you get home, you know?
Yeah. And
But the other thing I actually wanted to mention real quick, and I know that you're all on this, is breathing factors in, at least for me. One thing I started having to pay attention to when it came to breathing was my environment, my
Mhm.
indoor environment. Paying attention to things like mold and paying attention to things like having plants to help give my home oxygen to breathe.
Yeah. And when you can, opening the doors and windows and letting fresh air in, especially in the spring months. So like right now is like the perfect temperature, at least here in Maryland, to have the doors and the windows open without getting more hot air coming in, but getting a nice cool breeze to really clean out your space.
Right.
And
Absolutely. That's really important.
I think it's very easy to forget that our breath and air is cleansing and purifying to us. Um, and I think a lot of meditation practices try to remind us of that, but I think it's easy to forget that just even on a normal moment where you're just breathing and doing work, that you're doing something for your health to be breathing and being mindful of it, being aware of it.
Right. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and so now spring is here, which is exciting. I've been keeping my doors and windows open and took all the plant babies out to give them new soil and bring them back inside.
Hmm.
Really glad the winter is over. I think for me, I have a harder time with breathing in the winter. What about you?
That's a really good question. I think probably with extreme temperatures in general. So I probably also
Mm.
have a similar issue in the summer. But I think it may be more noticeable in the summer because, at least in Maryland, because Maryland has very high humidity. Um,
Right.
so the air is very heavy. So it requires a little bit more strength to breathe, so to say, in the summer versus very dry air in the winter. But dry air
That's a
in
good
the
point.
winter is another kind of challenge because it's harder to really bring into your body. So really like having a humidifier and that sort of thing is really necessary in this area. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
was just going to ask you about that. Do you think the humidifier plays into breathing?
I definitely think it does. A- if not for the actual breathing itself, but for just moistening our lungs and nasal passages, because it's I don't think that I generally I use a humidifier, so I don't have the issue, but I can definitely see like the ease at which people can get nosebleeds from dry air, and just not having everything moist to come into our lungs. And I also think if we have that, if we're missing that moisture in the air, it's also easier to get sick because the when there's moisture in the air, bacteria, dust, and things like that settle to the ground much easier because they will collect that moisture and get heavier and fall to the ground. If you think like
Mm,
microscopically. So when things are
right.
dry, we're much more likely to inhale them because they're floating around in the air rather than being heavier and dropping to the ground. Um, so I definitely think there's that having humidifiers is really important during drier months, for most individuals.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that. Definitely. I've tended to try and keep, I have radiators and I keep clean water, big
Hmm.
containers of clean water on them in the
Yep.
winter.
I think that's just as
Um,
effective. Just some method of getting more moisture into the air. Well, I can say though, because I've tried it, I did not find boiling water to be as helpful. Um, and I think that's just because it's also adding heat as well. But definitely if you have a radiator, I think it's really necessary to have that water on there because it's a dry heat. Um,
Right.
and I always remember in high school because I was exposed to people from all different cultures around the world in my high school, and a lot of people would dry their clothes on their not on their heaters, on their radiators, and that was a way of getting the moisture into the air while also drying their clothes.
Interesting.
So it was a nice twofer there.
Yeah. It's funny because I warm my clothes up on the radiator, but just so I can put them on nice and toasty warm.
Sounds nice too. I wish I had a radiator.
Yeah, so I think, going into next week talking about meditation is going to be perfect because I think you and I both really kind of started with the yoga meditation deal as far as related to breathing. And it's made a huge difference. I now pay attention more often through the day. Once I got in that habit of like in the morning and the evening, I have these moments through the day where I come back to my breath. And I'm like, oh, I'm holding my breath again. Or, oh, I'm not breathing in the belly, or, what have you. Like it's becoming more of something that I'm aware of. Whereas I used to not be aware of anything other than I struggled to breathe a lot through infections.
And, Annabelle, you used a phrase that I really like, and I use it a lot in meditation myself. And because this is a great transition towards talking about meditation next week, is that when you are meditating, it's a lot more thinking about what's going on in the mind. But the best phrase you can remember is when you don't know what else to do, go back to your breath. And that's exactly what you just said. When you've got something going on, just go back to your breath. It's our core, it's our center, it's where we come from. And so we go back to that. Just always go back where you come from.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great practice that I did learn and adopt through learning more formal meditation. And especially when I'm having issues with sensory overload or something along those lines, or symptoms, things of that nature, or even just sitting around, I just remember, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to come back to the breathing. And I love how you were saying, like, come back to home, come back to the core of it. So I think, it becomes more second nature to pay attention to these kinds of things once you start realizing that something like breathing makes such a big difference, which we know it does. I mean, we know that if we don't breathe, we can't live. We know that we need oxygen, but we don't know it in a way that, I don't know a way to describe it. It's almost like I knew it intellectually, but I didn't know it in a wise way. I had no wisdom there.
Yeah, we weren't very conscious of it. We weren't using our mindful techniques.
Right, right. So it goes a long way. So that'll be great. I'm excited about doing the meditation talk next week.
I am as well. Any other last words, Annabelle, about breathing? I mean, I just tell people to just start, just pay attention to it. You don't even have to try the few different practices we talked about. Just pay attention to your own breathing because it's really where you got to actually start. Is just paying attention to
Yeah,
it in the first place.
absolutely. Well, I second that.
Well, I hope you guys are all enjoying our Wellness Watch sessions. And if you would like to keep them happening, please be sure to join us on Patreon, which you can see here, patreon.com/The Dancing Herbalist. You get early access to blogs, bonus content, and a variety of other different things with access to our Patreon. So I hope you will join us there. And again, next week we're going to be talking about meditation. And if you do have any additional questions, feel free to come over to our Facebook group, The Dancing Herbalists Herbies. And that's the best place to ask your quick questions to the herbalists. But thank you, Annabelle, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone else. I hope you all have a great week. And remember to practice breathing.
Thanks so much.